Hello everybody, just wanted to make a quick video about this primary Arms SLX 1:6x24 second focal plane scope. This is specifically the one that's supposedly been lighting the internet on fire. This is the Nova reticle scope, the ACSS Nova. Just got it in today, and I'm just making this video to give some quick thoughts about it and basically see if it actually lives up to the hype that it's been building up, and you know what's good about it, what's bad about it so far at least. And again, just some quick dirty thoughts. So first and foremost, this is the box that it comes in. Nothing really special with the packaging. It does come with scope caps. I have them removed right now, but it does have a front and back flip up little, scope caps or whatever. They're fine, nothing special. I typically tend to take them off. Anyway, again, it does come with caps. As far as what else is in the packaging, not really too much. Got your basic, cleaner, wipe shit, instruction manuals and shit. You do have a little silica pack. And this is what is this? Little Allen wrench. Okay, yeah, that's basically it. That's all that came in the box, so nothing special. Anyway, as far as the scope itself, we have it sitting in this Aero Precision ultralight mount. It's just sitting on my Brin right now, this CZ Brin. And I do want to say that there is a really good review on this thing out already by a channel called Superset CA. I believe that's the name of the channel. The guy on the channel does a fantastic job reviewing the scope, actually, doing a proper review of this thing. I would highly suggest you go check it out. He's much more thorough than I'm going to be, but again, I just got this thing today. I haven't had it in for a month like some of these other YouTube reviewers have. I did purchase this with my own money, so just unbiased thoughts that I'm going to give you real quick. But anyway, first thing I noticed when I got this thing out the box and when I got it mounted up is the throw lever is really freaking stiff. It is very, very stiff out the box. I'm pretty sure it will loosen up over time, but it is extremely stiff right out of the box. Fortunately, this thing does come with the integrated throw lever. It is basically attached on there with some screws, as you can see. It is a metal throw lever, apparently aluminum, probably made out of the same material as the scope body. It does have this texturing knurling on the sides of it. It is rather sharp. It does work fine, but it is, again, very stiff. Seems like it's starting to slightly loosen up a little bit, but again, it is pretty stiff, even though you would expect that of a new scope. This one is definitely stiffer than most, I'll say that. Anyway, this is a 30 millimeter scope, of course. It's 30 millimeter scope mount. The scope caps on it, or the turrets, are capped. These caps do appear to be of pretty decent quality. There are the turrets underneath, and ooh, okay, a little clickier than I expected. Maybe that's coming across here. Tactile enough. You can definitely hear it, that's for sure. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. As far as the other controls, let's flip it around and look at the other side. So this is the illumination control right here. There are no off positions between each setting. It does go 1 through 11. And it's going to be very difficult for me to show this on camera, so I'll just try to describe it to you as best I can. This is the scope that does have the daylight bright reticle. It's just a very simple crosshair with some, windage and elevation holds or cross hashes in the reticle. And the reticle itself is a fiber wire that has an LED supplement, I guess you would say, a little LED light that supplements the fiber wire. And yes, it is very bright. It is definitely daylight bright, nuclear bright, whatever you want to call it, aim point bright. That shit is bright. This is by far the, I think this is probably the first legit budget scope that's actually had a daylight bright reticle like that. The thing works. It does live up to the hype, as if you've done any research on this scope already, it has a lot of hype behind that specific feature. Yes, it absolutely lives up to it. Daylight bright. Yes, absolutely. The one thing that I will say about this scope that also it seems to do pretty well at is with higher end scopes, the trying to describe this the best I can. With higher end scopes, like the scope body, whenever you get behind the scope and you look through it, tends to kind of just disappear and blend into your sight picture. Good scopes, at least. A well-built scope will typically have a design where the scope body just kind of disappears within your field of view, and you might see a very thin ring around your reticle, and it looks like it's just kind of floating in space. That's probably the best way I can describe it. Higher end scopes, definitely, at least the good ones, have that feature. That is something that they incorporate into their design. This particular scope, excuse me, probably more so than any other budget scope I've ever handled and ever used before, does have very minimal scope body appearing in your sight picture when you get behind it and when you look through it. It's definitely not, like Vortex Razor HD minimal, but it is, at least for a budget scope, very, very, very little scope body actually appearing in your sight picture, which is very nice. That is very nice. This is actually an older primary arms Gen 3 scope. This is also a second focal plane scope. And it served me well, but these you can definitely tell they're on the lower end of the budget spectrum when it comes to LPVOs. While they do tend to work, and if you just want to use something to go to the range, go plinking with, maybe do a little bit of hunting with, these are fine. They are really good for making long distance shots, because the ACS reticles on them work very, very well. But they are perfectly fine, perfectly serviceable scopes, I should say. The biggest drawback with all of these older primary arm scopes is typically the glass quality, the eyebox. They don't have very good glass quality. And when people say with scopes, when we start talking about glass quality, we're typically talking about several things. We're talking about edge-to-edge clarity. So like when you look through scope, if you look through the center of the scope or the center of the image within the scope, typically it's going to be clearer than the outer edges of the scope, or as you move towards the outside of the sight picture or outside of the glass. That clarity typically tends to degrade the further and further you get away from the center of the glass and the center of the picture. There's also typically some distortion that happens. You'll typically notice this is kind of like a fisheye effect that you'll see whenever you look through these things. So whenever you get behind the scope, you might see some fisheyeing, in which that's just the image tends to bend around around or away from the center of the glass or the center of the image. That is very noticeable on cheaper scopes. You also get something called chromatic aberration, which is it's just basically light anomalies that you'll see whenever you're looking through them. And again, much more noticeable on lower end or cheaper scopes, which are more often than not made in China and use Chinese glass. Mid-tier scopes will typically be made in the Philippines, and they are usually of a noticeably higher quality. And then usually the best scopes are always made in Japan or in Europe, or in some cases America, and typically have much superior glass than the glass that you'll find on these lower end primary arms of Chinese made scopes. And that superior glass usually is reflected in the sense that it'll have less distortion, less fisheye effect, and it will have more edge to edge clarity, less chromatic aberration and other little anomalies that you'll notice through the scope when you use it through varied lighting conditions and shit. More light transmission, of course, when you use it in low light conditions, for example. You'll notice all that shit when you have higher end scopes. And for example, this is a Bushnell SMRS Pro. This is the Gen 2 model. This is actually, I want to say it's a $1,000 plus scope. It's Japanese made by Lowe in Japan. Very good class, very high quality scope. I believe these have been discontinued, but this is a very good, very high quality scope. As you can see, Japan. This is also a 1:6. This is 1:6.5 actually by 24, 30 millimeter scope. Very similar to the primary arms below, but this one has Japanese made glass, much higher construction quality, much better glass quality. And whenever you get behind a scope with Japanese glass, one of the first things you'll notice is the edge-to-edge clarity. So as you get towards the outside edges of your picture, away from the center and out, out toward the outside edge, and lower quality scopes, the image quality tends to fall apart. It might get blurry, kind of soggy toward the edges. You don't notice that at all with this particular scope, for example. And I know this is just a one-of-one example, but again, just to give a reference point, I guess, towards or between a much cheaper Japanese quality scope or much cheaper Chinese made scope and a actually a much higher quality, much more expensive Japanese made scope. So one of the things that I just wanted to get these two together, and I looked behind both of them and just kind of compared them a little bit along with the primary arms. And we also have an older Vortex Strike Eagle over here, which is roughly in the same price point or the same price ballpark as this primary arms. And I'll just tell you right off the bat, this primary arms does punch well above its weight. It is by no means on par with this, but it is definitely hands down better than this and definitely better than that Strike Eagle over there too. So first thing, the image on this particular scope, it does kind of get a little soggy, a little blurry, a little, a little mushy towards the outside edges, but you kind of have to be looking for it. And once you've been behind, high quality glass, you kind of see this shit more often than not. It's much easier to spot once you kind of train your eyes behind the good shit, But the image does have some edge-to-edge clarity loss toward the edges. It does have a slight fisheye effect in the middle, and as you kind of move out towards the center middle or out away from the middle, you do kind of notice that fisheye effect, but that is kind of present on most, if not all, scopes to some degree. Some just show it less, some show it a little more so if they're lower quality. This one does have it. It is not nearly as bad as the older primary arm scope or the Strike Eagle over here, so it is better. It is noticeably better glass than the older generation primary arm scopes. Again, it does show less of the scope body through the image once you get behind it, which is also very nice. The one thing that I will say that I noticed about it immediately when I got behind it is the eyebox is pretty sensitive on it, specifically left to right. So as you move your head behind the scope, like left to right, of course, you have to get, a proper sight picture behind these scopes in order to see the image. Otherwise, you're going to see scope body as you move your head around or as the scope moves around. So you do have to align yourself properly behind any scope to get a good sight picture, right? Higher quality scopes and more expensive scopes with better glass typically have more forgiving eye boxes. So if your head is maybe a little off center, a little off axis or whatever, you can still see the image through the scope. That's a hallmark of a good scope, having a very forgiving eye box. These don't. This one, for example, has a very forgiving eye box, wonderful eye box. This primary arms, on the other hand, it's a bit tight, especially with left to right movement. It is noticeably better up and down, which is interesting. So whenever you're like off center, like up or down, you can see a little bit more, and it's a bit more forgiving, on the vertical axis, I should say. But left to right, it is quite tight. And this is at 1x, by the way. So as you crank up the magnification and you go, say, from 1x to 6x, it gets even tighter. So that is something about this scope that I did notice right out of the box when I was just kind of playing around with it. Eye box is a bit tight left to right, slightly more forgiving up and down. Other than that, the glass on it is definitely better than most other Chinese low quality scopes, or low cost scopes, I should say. Noticeably better than the Strike Eagle, and definitely better than the older gen primary arm scopes. The reticle, again, nuclear bright, settings 1 to 11. The scope turrets and caps on there do appear to be of pretty good quality. Again, you heard the turrets earlier; they were pretty clicky. They do have pretty good tactile feedback, so they're not bad at all, especially considering the cost of this scope. The fast focus eyepiece back here, this is what you use to focus the scope to your eye. So typically you want to get this and adjust it until you get, you know, as close to a true 1x image behind the scope when you look through it as you can. Works fine. It was kind of tight right out the box, but it works now. With that said, the scope itself is the dimensions on it. It seems like it's, I guess, right on par with the older scopes. So it might even be a tad longer. Yeah, it is a tad longer than this Gen 3 scope, which is interesting. It's not particularly heavy. I believe it's only about 18, 19 ounces, somewhere in that neighborhood. This one, for example, right here is right at 17.5 ounces, which is fairly light for a LPVO. 19 ounces, that's not heavy, that's not light, that's okay, I guess. Yeah, it says on the box 17.85, I guess. Yeah, okay, maybe I overestimated a little bit there. So about 18 ounces roughly, not too bad. Other than that, the scope is very... It's pretty decent quality right out the box. I don't see any major quality issues with it. It has pretty decent fit and finish considering the cost. Other than the fact that this is pretty tight right here. There's really nothing that I can say negative about it so far. Let's just check these turrets one more time. There we go. Yeah, if we can get this bad boy off right here. Yeah, they're pretty clicky. You definitely know you're turning them, that's for sure. Nice tactile feedback. Very audible. Yeah, really nothing negative to say about that at all. So, for the money, for the price point, this does appear to be a pretty good scope. Not really much bad I can say about it. The most noticeably negative thing or negative aspect about this scope, I would say, would probably be the very tight and unforgiving left to right eyebox. Of course, it gets tighter as you crank up the magnification, obviously, but I mean, that's really it. Getting behind it, I mean, the image is pretty pleasant. I mean, the glass does look good. There is a pretty huge field of view through this thing. The specifications state it's 120 feet at 100 yards, which that's really good. That's definitely on the upper end of the spectrum for scopes in this price range. And eye relief is 4 inches. It seems like it might be slightly less than 4 inches when you actually get behind it, but that's still really good. Eye relief, of course, is basically the distance that your eye should be from the scope to actually see properly, you know, to actually see the entire sight picture through the scope. So 4 inches is pretty good. That's pretty long. This, for example, is also 4 inches. And, you know, eye relief is kind of a matter of preference, honestly. Some people actually prefer shorter eye relief, but that's not bad at all. That's a good thing. And yeah, I mean, the light transmission through it looks really good. Glass quality is pretty great for the money, and definitely compared to other options in its price range. So yeah, I would say this thing does pretty much live up to the hype. The reticle on this thing is very simple. It's very clean. It's I mean, there's no, like, I guess it's very difficult to talk about a reticle without being able to see it. So this is probably the best image I can get for you guys. But anyway, this is, it's probably not the cleanest shot you'll ever see, but this is all I got to work with, right? So looking through the scope here, the reticle, again, is just kind of a simple crosshair. There's some dashes and range finding stuff built into the reticle. But this is actually on setting 1, if you can see the dot. So that is setting 1, which is actually very, very usable, believe it or not. I know it's hard to express this through this this video because we're shooting through cameras and multiple lenses and all that shit, but believe it when I say it, yo, this is a very usable reticle even at the very first illumination setting. And we'll just crank it up. This is actually setting 2. This is setting 3. That's setting 4. I'm trying to get this as best I can. I know there's like all sorts of reflections and shit showing up in there, but this is all I got to work with, so just bear with me. This is setting 5. That's setting 6. Again, that goes all the way to 11. This is 7. See how bright that is? It's actually extremely bright. That's 8. 9. 10. And nuclear 11. So this is the highest setting, right? This is setting 11. Now, I know you can see what appears to be a substantial amount of bloom and even some refraction on the bottom of the scope right there. And on the outer edge of the scope body, you can see like the red reflecting off the edges. In reality, though, when you actually look through it, it's really not that bad. Like the reticle will obviously bloom a little bit once you get up to those nuclear bright settings, depending on your lighting conditions. So like if you're in a darker environment and you turn it up to 11, well, yeah, it's going to bloom. But if you're outside in the bright sun, it's going to look sharp as hell. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. This reticle itself, the dot, is actually pretty damn sharp, all things considered. And the cool thing about it is it's actually very fine. Like if you go down to the lower settings, like setting 3, for example, this is very, very usable. And I'm shooting this video indoors in a fairly well lit and bright room. And setting 3 honestly might even be too bright for this environment. So turning it down to 1 or 2, still extremely usable. This is actually setting 1. This is as low as it goes. I'll try to line it up again. Yeah, that's as low as it goes. That's setting 1. And that is bright enough to be extremely usable. So as far as the illumination settings on this thing, they are great. They are absolutely great. I have personally used a Vortex Viper PST before, and I know this is it's going to get compared to that thing a lot, because that is probably honestly like the best scope that you can get in the low. That's like probably the cheapest good scope you can get, period, right? And I think this thing will give it a run for the money. And I will say that at least compared to that scope, I know I don't have an example here to compare it with right now. That scope probably is better overall, but and what I would say, why is it better? Well, it's definitely got a more forgiving eyebox than this thing, which is the first thing that you'll notice if you get behind them both. It also has illumination settings, or I'm sorry, it has off positions between each illumination setting. So for example, like if you go between 0 and 1, or between 1 and 2, there's actually an off position between each setting, so you can just kind of leave it there and then just quickly go to the setting you want without having it left on all the time. That's a nice feature. That is a very nice feature. It'd be nice if this had that, but I believe Primary Arms has another implementation that they're going to do, which is like an auto live feature or an auto live battery cap, where you can take this battery cap off, put a new one on it, and it's got like the shake the weight features that like Hollow Suns and a lot of modern red dots have. So that is pretty cool, but it would be nice to have an off position between each illumination setting. But for the price point, I can understand that is a sacrifice that had to be made, because you got to cut costs somewhere, especially to get this thing where they're going to be selling it at. Other than that, though, yeah, I mean, for the money, this thing is great. Honestly, I wouldn't even look at a Strike Eagle after getting a hold of one of these, because honestly, I've never been that impressed with Strike Eagles. I mean, honestly, I think they're not great at all. They're kind of trash, but that's just my opinion. Even these older Primary Arms scopes, I mean, they're okay, but the reticles on them are too dim. The glass quality on them is not great at all. The reticles are very usable and very functional, but other than that, the entire package leaves a lot to be desired. This is definitely the first budget Primary Arms scope that I can honestly say is good. And for the money, it's very difficult to beat. This is a second focal plane scope, and I mean, Primary Arms is kind of known for making a lot of really good first focal plane scopes, especially with the ACS reticles that they have in them. But this, even though it doesn't have that sweet ass ACSS reticle, this is a very, very, very usable and functional second focal plane scope with a very functional reticle. And if you like to shoot with both eyes open, especially like on lower powers, like if you're going to spend a lot of time shooting at 1x, this is actually a very good option, just because that reticle, it kind of functions like a red dot. Once you train yourself to use it, I mean, it's kind of just like using a red dot, only you have the added benefit of flipping up the magnification, you know, whenever you want to, or if your eyes suck, kind of like mine, you know, and you have like a really bad astigmatism, hey, these things are kind of a godsend at that point. But yeah, this is a good scope for the money, y'all. This is a really good scope for the money. I can't really complain about it too much. Again, biggest drawback with it, tight ass eyebox left to right. I mean, that's it. I can't really even complain about the lack of illumination, or the lack of off positions between each illuminating setting. That's kind of a nitpick thing when you're talking about like a $300 scope. But I mean, this is a good scope for the money. It's good. I mean, I would definitely suggest, if you're looking at a budget LPVO and you don't really have $500-600 to drop on a Vortex Viper PST Gen 2, this is probably the next best thing on the market to get. Burris RT6 comes to mind as well. It's going to be right in the same price range as this, and I have used those before as well. And honestly, while I would say they probably have a smidge better glass, and maybe a little more forgiving eyebox, this is probably a better scope than even the RT6. Definitely a more usable reticle, that's for sure. And everything else is going to be, you know, very close to the same as the RT6 as far as like the build quality, the controls. The one thing that this absolutely would smash the RT6 in is the illumination, the daylight bright reticle, you know, 1x performance, if you would say. This thing is great. So yeah, that's probably all I have to say about this thing. If you were on the fence about getting it, you can probably go ahead and buy it confidently. I'm pretty sure you won't regret your purchase. It is a good scope for the money. There are better scopes out there, but you're going to have to spend a lot more money. And that's pretty much where it is with this thing. So yeah, if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments below. Leave the video a like and all that shit, I guess. And have a great day.